Hello. Welcome to OJ Studios. Please enjoy today's short story, Gracie, by Olivia Julius.
I always hated going to the hospital, and the one I was standing in front of I hated more than anything. St. Mary's Cancer Research Center in Springfield, Illinois was one of the biggest hospitals I had ever seen. I had only been in this one a few times, all of them to see my sister Jessica during her treatments. But this time felt different. My grandpa had pulled me out of school just 1 hour into the school day. That already sent up red flags for me. It had never happened before. Normally, if my grandpa wanted to take me to the hospital to visit my sister, he would wait until school got out. But not today! I was quickly taken out of class and hurriedly put into my grandpa's car by the principal of the school. I wasn't allowed to ask questions or get any reason why I had to hurry out of class. All I was told was that my grandpa was waiting for me. Once I was in the back seat of my grandpa's truck, he quickly sped off without a word. I looked in the rearview mirror of the truck and caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were moist, almost like he was crying. "Grandpa?" I asked, my voice shook a little as I spoke. "What's going on?" His eyes started to look at me through the rearview mirror, but he didn't say anything to me. Instead, he put his eyes back on the road. Ever since I was forced to move in with him a year ago, Grandpa has always been a source of fun conversations, but this time was different. As we pulled into the hospital's parking lot, a knot formed in my stomach, tighter with each passing second. The air inside the car felt heavy, suffocating, as if it were trying to suppress the unspoken tension between us. I unbuckled my seatbelt, the metal clasp clicking loudly in the silence of the car. My grandpa turned off the engine, but he didn't move. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Grandpa, please," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. "Tell me what's going on." Grandpa got out of the truck, and I started to do the same, but then Grandpa stopped me before I got out. He handed me a bag and I looked inside to find the blue dress I had gotten a week ago. It was the dress that I wore last Friday to the school's children's choir recital. I had a solo in one of the songs. "Put it on, I'll stand guard," Grandpa ordered. I nodded my head. I took the dress from him, confusion swirling within me like a tempestuous storm. Why did he want me to change into this dress here, in the back seat of his truck? And why did he seem so urgent about it? Nevertheless, I complied with his instructions, slipping out of my school clothes and into the familiar blue dress. Its soft fabric clung to my skin, a comforting reminder of happier times. As I adjusted the hem and smoothed out the wrinkles, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to unfold. Once I was dressed, I got out of the truck and looked up at my grandpa, who stood watch by the truck, his gaze fixed on the hospital entrance. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stoicism that barely concealed the turmoil raging beneath the surface. "Grandpa," I said tentatively, stepping closer to him. "What's going on? Why are we here?" He turned to me, his eyes weary yet determined. "We're here to see your sister, Jessica," he said softly. "And you want to look your best, don't you?" I nodded my head and began to walk with him into the hospital. Normally when we come here, we would make a pit stop in the cafe so we could buy Mom and Dad some coffee and sneak Jessica a cinnamon roll. But this time we walked right by the small cafe, and straight to the elevators. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, admitting us into its sterile embrace. I pressed the button for the oncology floor, the familiar chime echoing in the enclosed space. The ascent felt interminable, each passing floor a reminder of the uncertainty awaiting us above. As the elevator came to a stop, the doors slid open once again, revealing the bustling hallway of the oncology ward. Nurses hurried past, their faces drawn with exhaustion, while patients and their families navigated the labyrinth of corridors with a sense of quiet resignation. Grandpa led the way, his steps purposeful yet measured. I followed closely behind, the weight of anticipation bearing down on my shoulders like a burden too heavy to bear. The distant hum of medical equipment mingled with the muffled sounds of whispered conversations, creating an eerie symphony that reverberated through the air. I stopped at the door that led to Jessica's room, but Grandpa kept walking down the hallway. He seemed like he was in a trance, almost like he was on autopilot. "They moved her to another room," he whispered. He took my hand and we continued to walk down the hallway to a part of the hospital that I had never seen before. I passed by a sign that said hospice care area and wondered what that meant. The hallway opened into a large waiting room, and sitting there were Jessica's classmates, members of the cheer squad she was a part of up until she got too sick to be able to cheer with them on the sidelines. In all there must have been 50 high schoolers there. They were all sitting there watching as Grandpa and I walked through the waiting room to get to another door. As we approached the door, I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that gripped my heart like a vice. Why were Jessica's classmates gathered here, in this somber place, and why did they look so sad? I heard some whispers from some of the high schoolers. "That's Jessica's little sister," I heard a teen girl who I recognized as Jessica's best friend Hillary. "This must be bad if all of Jessica's family is coming," I heard a boy whisper to a girl. I tried to ignore them. What did they know about anything? Jessica is a brave and tough girl, nothing can happen to her. Grandpa opened the door on the far end of the waiting room, and we walked through. In the middle of the room sat a nurse's station. Nurses walked around the area looking up at the screens that monitored the patients whose rooms lined the large area. All the rooms had large windows so I could see into them. Most had old people lying in medical beds, but the last one had the blinds closed. And that was the room that we were headed for. As we approached the closed blinds of the last room, my heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the silence of the hallway. The nurses looked at Grandpa and I and then silently let us pass. There were no hellos of attempts at small talk like they normally tried to do. Grandpa squeezed my hand reassuringly, his presence a steady anchor in the midst of uncertainty. Together, we reached the door, its surface cool against my trembling fingertips. With a deep breath, Grandpa pushed the door open, revealing the dimly lit room beyond. A soft glow emanated from the bedside lamp. Mom and Dad sat next to a medical bed, both were holding one of Jessica's hands. Jessica's boyfriend Eric sat in the far corner, watching over Jessica as she slept. As I looked at Dad, the lines etched on his face told a story of how much stress he had been under these past few months. His eyes, once bright with vitality, now held a weariness that seemed to penetrate to the depths of his soul. Despite the strength he exuded, I could sense the fragility of his spirit, a silent plea for respite from the relentless onslaught of life's trials. I have never seen him look so helpless as he does now. Mom, too, bore the weight of the world on her shoulders, her gentle features contorted with anguish and sorrow. Her hands trembled as she looked at Jessica's face, her touch tender yet saddening. Jessica lay in the bed motionless. She was only 16 years old, but she looked a lot older. Her eyes were closed, hiding her beautiful blue eyes. She looked like she was just sleeping in her bed. Jessica's skin was pale against the stark white sheets, her breasts shallow and labored. Tubes and wires snaked across her body, her bald head was uncovered, something that Jessica would never have wanted. It was her biggest insecurity. Before the radiation treatments, before the leukemia diagnosis, she used to have the most beautiful long brunette hair. Now the cancer has taken that away. I absent-mindedly felt the strands of my blonde hair, remembering the promise I had given to Jessica a few months back. I promised her that I will grow my hair out, so I can donate it to cancer patients who lost their hair just like her. My parents looked up from Jessica's bedside, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. Tears welled in my eyes as I took in the sight of my sister lying motionless in the hospital bed, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by the relentless march of illness. "Gracie," Mom whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "We're so glad you're here." I nodded without being able to say anything, my throat was tight. This was not like other times when I visited Jessica, this was the complete opposite. Dad reached out a trembling hand, beckoning me to Jessica's side. With shaky steps, I crossed the room, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I approached Jessica's bedside, a flood of memories washed over me, each one a bittersweet reminder of happier times. I remember the laughter we shared after we went to the beach together and played in the sand, the secrets whispered in the dead of night after I came into her room after having a bad dream. She always told me that I was one of her best friends. We were more than sisters, we were two close friends who never really fought. But now, as I stood by her side, I felt the weight of the present moment bearing down on me like a crushing burden. The reality of Jessica's illness loomed large, casting a shadow over everything we once held dear. I reached out and took Jessica's hand in mine. She didn't react, her eyes didn't open, her hand didn't close around mine, nothing. Her skin was cool against mine, her fingers frail and delicate, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy she once had. "Hey, Jess," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's me, Gracie. I'm here." But Jessica remained motionless, her eyes closed as if lost in a dreamless slumber. I longed to see her beautiful blue eyes once more, to hear her voice ringing with laughter and joy. But all I could do was hold her hand and pray for a miracle. "Gracie honey," Mom said, standing next to me. "We need to talk." As Mom spoke, her voice trembled with emotion, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I turned to face her, my heart pounding in my chest as I braced myself for what she was about to say. "Sweetheart," Mom began, her voice barely above a whisper, "Jessica's condition has worsened. The doctors, they don't think she has much time left." The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable a dagger to my heart. I felt as if the world around me had come crashing down, the weight of despair crushing me beneath its relentless onslaught. "No," I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. "No, it can't be," but even as I spoke, I knew deep down that Mom's words were true. I had seen the toll that Jessica's illness had taken on her fragile body, the way it had ravaged her once vibrant spirit. And now, faced with the reality of her imminent departure, I felt a sense of profound loss wash over me like a tidal wave. Mom reached out and enveloped me in a tight embrace, her arms a comforting refuge in the midst of turmoil. I buried my face in her shoulder, the tears flowing freely now, unchecked by the walls I had so desperately tried to build around my heart. I felt Dad embracing both of us, his presence a silent reassurance in the face of overwhelming grief. Together, we stood there, locked in a tight embrace, as if seeking solace in each other's arms amidst the storm raging around us. "So, what happens now?" I asked between the sobs. Dad looked at Mom and then back at me. "A nurse will come in and begin taking Jessica off of life support. After that she will be free to go on her time, it's up to us to be here for her." As Dad spoke, his voice trembled with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I nodded silently, the weight of his words settling heavily upon my shoulders. The reality of Jessica's impending passing loomed large, casting a shadow over everything we once knew. After what felt like an eternity, a nurse entered the room, her presence a solemn echo in the hushed stillness. With gentle hands, she began the process of removing Jessica from life support, her movements deliberate yet tender. As the machines were silenced one by one, a sense of finality settled over the room, the air thick with the weight of impending loss. I held Jessica's hand tightly, unwilling to let go of her. And then, as the last cord was disconnected, we all looked at Jessica's bedside, our hearts heavy with grief yet filled with love. We whispered words of comfort and solace, our voices mingling in a chorus of sorrow and remembrance. Together, Jessica's boyfriend Eric, Grandpa, Mom, Dad, and I, remained by Jessica's bedside, our hearts heavy with grief and sorrow. Minutes stretched into hours as we waited for the inevitable. In those final moments, surrounded by the ones she loved most, Jessica slipped away peacefully, her spirit soaring free from the confines of her earthly body. And though our hearts were shattered by the pain of her loss, we found solace in the knowledge that she was finally at peace, her suffering at an end. Time seemed to stand still as the heart monitor flat-lined. Mom hugged me tightly as she watched as the doctor came in and verified Jessica's passing. Both Mom and Dad were trying to be tough for me, but I could see their exteriors crumbling. Tears streamed down our faces as we said our final goodbyes, each word choked with emotion. Grandpa stood quietly in the corner, his eyes filled with sorrow. As the doctor left the room, a heavy silence descended upon us, broken only by the sound of our ragged breaths and the gentle hum of medical equipment in the other rooms. Eric was the first to speak. His voice was numb. "I'll go tell the others." Eric's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of sorrow and loss. With a solemn nod, he turned and quietly left the room, his footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. In his absence, the silence deepened, wrapping around us like a shroud. We stood there, a family united in grief, each lost in our own thoughts and memories of Jessica. Mom and Dad clung to each other, their embracing a lifeline in the midst of turmoil. Grandpa stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. I wondered what he was thinking. He lost his wife, my grandmother, a year ago. And now he lost his oldest granddaughter. I remained by Jessica's bedside, my hands still clasped tightly in hers. Despite the pain and sorrow that weighed heavily on my heart, I found solace in the knowledge that she was finally free from the chains of illness that had bound her for so long. After what felt like an eternity, Dad out his hand on my shoulder. "It's time to go, sweet bug," he said, using the nickname he always used for me. "No," I whispered. I held onto Jessica's hand a little tighter. "I want to stay here with Jess." Dad's gentle touch was both comforting and urging, pulling me gently from the embrace of grief and into the realm of acceptance. His words, though tender, carried the weight of finality, reminding me that our time with Jessica had come to an end. "Sweet bug," Dad repeated softly, his voice a soothing balm to my shattered spirit. "I know it's hard, but Jessica wouldn't want you to stay here. She'd want you to remember her as she was, full of life and laughter." Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to accept the truth of his words. Deep down, I knew he was right. Jessica wouldn't want me to linger in the shadow of her passing, consumed by grief and sorrow. She would want me to carry on, to live my life to the fullest, in honor of the precious time we had shared together. With a heavy heart, I reluctantly released Jessica's hand and allowed Dad to guide me away from her bedside. Each step felt like a betrayal, a silent acknowledgement of the void left behind by her absence. As we made our way out of the room, I cast one last lingering glance over my shoulder, imprinting the image of Jessica's peaceful face in my mind. Despite the pain of parting, I took comfort in the knowledge that she was finally at peace, her spirit soaring free from the confines of earthly suffering. We walked out of her room and went back to where the waiting room was. Once we opened the door, we found all of Jessica's classmates, friends, and teammates looking over at us. They all looked like they had been crying. Mascara ran down some of the girls' eyes. They all watched us, unsure of what to do or what to say. Dad left Mom's side and walked forward a little. All eyes were now on him. "I want to thank all of you for being here," he said, his words were broken as he spoke. Dad's voice cracked with emotion as he addressed Jessica's classmates, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The weight of grief hung heavy in the air, casting a somber pall over the room. "You all meant so much to Jessica," Dad continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "She talked about her friends from school all the time. You were her lifeline, her source of strength and support during some of the toughest moments of her life." Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to Dad's words, his heartfelt gratitude a poignant reminder of the impact Jessica had on those around her. Despite the pain of her passing, I found solace in the knowledge that she was loved and cherished by so many. "I know this is hard for all of us," Dad continued, his voice wavering with emotion. "But let's remember Jessica for the amazing person she was. Let's honor her memory by living our lives with the same courage, kindness, and compassion that she showed every single day." His words resonated deeply within me, stirring something profound in my heart. Despite the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume us, Dad's words were a beacon of hope in the darkness, a reminder that Jessica's spirit would live on in the hearts of those she touched. Together, we stood there, united in our sorrow yet buoyed by the strength of our shared memories. In that moment, surrounded by Jessica's classmates and loved ones, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a quiet assurance that Jessica's legacy would endure long after she was gone. As Dad finished speaking, there was a moment of solemn silence, broken only by the soft sound of sniffles and quiet sobs. And then, slowly but surely, Jessica's classmates began to stand, one by one, their expressions somber yet resolute. With tear-streaked faces and heavy hearts, they gathered around us, offering words of comfort and solace in the face of overwhelming grief. In that moment, surrounded by love and support, I knew that we would find the strength to carry on, to honor Jessica's memory in everything we did.